My daughter called me on a Sunday morning in April, 2 weeks after her 18th birthday, and said she needed to tell me something before she lost the nerve to say it. She had been crying. I could hear it in the particular tightness of her voice, the way she was breathing carefully between sentences, the way she had breathed since she was small when she was trying not to let the crying show. She said she and her brother had gone to the county courthouse the previous Thursday. She said they had requested the divorce file. She said they had sat in a public records room for 3 hours and read every document, every motion, every declaration, every piece of evidence that had been submitted to the court during the 2 years their father and I spent dismantling our marriage through attorneys and hearings and the specific, grinding machinery of a family court that does not care how exhausted you are and does not pause for the people who are smallest in the room. She said, "Mom, we read everything." And then she said, "I am so sorry. I am so sorry for what we said to you." Welcome back to BetrayalLedger Stories, where family secrets never stay buried for long. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and join the family, because this story is one of the wildest ones we've ever told. Let's get into it. My name is Jessica Moore. I am 38 years old. And for 7 years, my ex-husband told our children that I had destroyed his life, poisoned their minds against me one careful conversation at a time. And I had stayed silent through all of it because my attorney told me silence was the only weapon that would not be used against me, and because I believed, in the way that only a mother can believe something without evidence and without guarantee, that the truth would find my children eventually if I simply refused to bury it. I need you to understand what silence costs before I tell you what it eventually bought. My ex-husband's name was Trevor Dawson. We had married when I was 24 and he was 27 in a small ceremony in Austin, Texas, at the garden venue his mother had chosen. In the June heat that pressed down on everything like a warm hand and made the flowers wilt slightly at the edges of the arrangements by the time the ceremony ended. I had loved him with the specific, uncomplicated certainty of someone who has not yet learned that certainty is not the same as accuracy. He was charming in the way that fills a room without trying. He was funny. He was present, at least in the beginning, in the way that makes you feel like the most interesting person in the space you share with someone, and that feeling, when it is given genuinely, is one of the most powerful things one person can offer another. The twins were born when I was 26. Emma and Connor, 7 minutes apart. Emma first in the characteristic fashion of a girl who had already decided she was not going to wait for anyone. They were the best thing I have ever done. I say that without qualification and without the performance of maternal sentiment, because it is simply true in the factual way that some things are true without requiring elaboration. The marriage started failing in the 3rd year. Not dramatically. Marriages rarely fail dramatically at the beginning. They fail in the way that water finds cracks, slowly and without announcement, following the path of least resistance until one day you look at the wall and understand that the damage goes further than the surface. Trevor had a temper that he managed in public and did not manage in private, the specific, controlled kind of anger that knows exactly where the walls are and stays just inside them in spaces with witnesses and releases freely in spaces without. I had spent the 3rd and 4th year of my marriage navigating that anger the way you navigate a space with unpredictable weather, constantly monitoring the atmosphere and adjusting my behavior to the forecast and telling myself that monitoring and adjusting was the same as managing and that managing was the same as fine. It was not fine. I filed for divorce when the twins were 4 years old. I filed because a therapist I had been seeing for 8 months, a careful, unhurried woman named Dr. Patricia Green who had offices in a building in North Austin that smelled like eucalyptus and new carpet, had said something to me on a Tuesday afternoon that I had not been ready to hear the first 6 times she found ways to say it, and that I was finally ready to hear on the 7th. She said, "Jessica, monitoring someone's mood to keep yourself safe is not a relationship. It is a survival strategy." I drove home from that appointment and I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, and then I went inside and I called an attorney. The divorce took 2 years. I want you to understand what 2 years of contested family court proceedings look like from the inside. Because the documents my children read in that public records room 7 years later were the physical record of those 2 years, and the documents do not capture the texture of it, the exhaustion, the cost, the specific particular damage of a legal process that requires you to prove things about your private life to strangers in a room that smells like carpet cleaner and fluorescent lighting. Trevor had hired an attorney who specialized in aggressive family court litigation, a man named Frank Holloway who understood that the goal was not resolution but attrition. And that attrition worked best when the other party was a mother who was also working full-time and raising twins with limited support, and who would eventually reach a point where the cost of continuing to fight was higher than the cost of whatever settlement was being offered. I did not reach that point. I want to be clear about that. I had my own attorney, a woman named Sandra Walsh who had 20 years of family court experience and the specific, unhurried competence of someone who had seen every version of this and understood that documentation was always the most powerful argument in the room. Sandra documented everything. Every incident I reported, every pattern I described, every piece of evidence I could provide of the things that had happened inside our marriage in the spaces without witnesses. She filed motions and responses and declarations and counterarguments with the methodical patience of someone building a case the way you build a structure, from the foundation up, making sure each piece was sound before adding the next. What I did not know yet was that Trevor had already started talking to the twins. They were 4 when the divorce was filed. 4 years old. The age at which children understand that something is wrong in the way that children understand everything, through atmosphere and tone and the specific adult behavior of people who are trying to seem normal when nothing is normal. Trevor was careful about what he said directly. He was too smart for direct statements. What he did instead was shape the atmosphere around the things he did not say, the sighs when my name came up, the particular silence he maintained when they asked questions about me that communicated, without words, that the question was painful in a way that was my fault. He told them I had chosen my career over our family. He told them I had been unhappy in ways that were not his fault. He told them, in the language available to a 4-year-old and then a 5-year-old and then a 6-year-old, that the divorce was a thing that had happened to him rather than something the two of us had arrived at together through years of accumulated damage. He did not tell them about the anger. He did not tell them about the Tuesday afternoon in Dr. Green's office. He did not tell them about the attorney who specialized in attrition. He told them a story in which he was the fixed point and I was the variable that had introduced instability, and he told that story patiently and consistently and in age-appropriate installments for 7 years. And by the time the twins were 11, they had absorbed it so completely that it had become, for them, simply the explanation for the shape of their family. My attorney told me not to counter it directly. Sandra said that any attempt I made to correct the narrative with the children would be used in court as evidence of parental alienation, that the documentation we had built would speak more clearly than anything I could say to 2 children who were not yet old enough to evaluate competing accounts of complex events. She said, "The truth is in the file, Jessica. Let the file do the work." I heard her. I understood the logic. And I spent 7 years living inside the cost of that logic, which was the specific, daily pain of children who looked at me with the careful distance of people who have been taught, without being told explicitly, that I was someone to be careful around. Emma was the harder one. She had her father's quickness, his way of arriving at conclusions before the evidence was fully assembled, and then defending those conclusions as if the speed of arrival was itself proof of accuracy. She was not cruel to me. She was distant in the way of someone who has decided that distance is the appropriate response to a person they have been told, in 100 subtle ways, is the reason for a pain they carry without fully being able to name it. Connor was quieter, more watchful, the kind of child who collects information before he commits to a position and who I had always believed, without being able to prove it, was not entirely convinced by the story he had been given but did not yet have the framework to challenge it. The framework arrived at 18. Emma had always been the one who needed to know things directly. She was the kind of person who read the terms and conditions, who asked follow-up questions, who could not rest with a partial picture if a complete one was available. 2 weeks after her 18th birthday, she had walked into the family court records office in Austin, Connor beside her, and requested the full file from our divorce proceedings. The clerk had handed them the documents without comment. They had sat in a public records room for 3 hours, and they had read everything Sandra Walsh had built over 2 years. Every declaration, every motion, every piece of evidence, every incident report, every psychological evaluation. Every document that had been submitted to the court in the process of determining what our family was going to look like after Trevor and I stopped being married. Emma called me on a Sunday morning in April. Connor was with her. I could hear his breathing in the background, that particular careful quiet of someone who is present for a conversation they believe matters and does not want to disrupt. She said they had read everything. She said the file told a story that was not the story they had been told. She said, "Mom, we read what he said about you in his declarations. And we read what the court found. And we read the psychological evaluation. And we read all of it." She said, "I am so sorry for what we said to you." I sat in my kitchen in the house I had bought in North Austin 3 years after the divorce, the one with the back porch that looked out over a yard I had planted slowly and carefully over 3 summers. And I held the phone and I listened to my daughter apologize for things she had said to me when she was 11 and 13 and 15, things she had said because she had been given a story and had not yet had access to the documents that told a different one. I did not cry during that call. I had done the crying already, years of it, in the specific privacy of a house where I had made sure my children never saw it because I had decided that whatever else happened, I was not going to give them the weight of my grief to carry alongside their own confusion. I said, "Emma, you were a child. Children believe what they are told by the people they love. That is not a failure. That is just being a child." She cried. Connor said something quietly on his end that I could not fully hear. Then Emma said, "We want to talk to you." "Really talk? Can we come over?" They came the following Saturday. They drove together from the apartment they shared near UT Austin, 20 minutes from my house, and they sat at my kitchen table in the morning light and we talked for 4 hours. Not about the documents specifically, not about the legal history, not about the declarations their father had filed or the things he had said about me in the years since. We talked about them. About who they had become in the years I had watched from the careful distance they had required. About Connor's quiet watchfulness and the way he had already been a fair witness even when he was 9, already not quite convinced by the story he was being told. About Emma's quickness and the way it had brought her to the courthouse at 18 with a question she could not leave unanswered. About what we were going to build now, with the information we all had, moving forward from a Saturday morning in April with coffee on the table and 7 years of distance dissolving in the specific, unhurried way that distance dissolves when the people on both sides of it have finally decided they are done maintaining it. Sandra Walsh had told me, 7 years earlier in a family court hallway that smelled like carpet cleaner and fluorescent lighting, that the truth was in the file. She had been right. The file had waited with the patience of a document, which is the most reliable kind of patience there is, and my children had found it when they were old enough to read it and understand it and sit with what it meant. I had waited too. Not with the patience of a document. With the harder, more uncertain patience of a person who does not know if what they are waiting for will arrive and who waits anyway because the alternative is to stop believing it will. It arrived on a Sunday morning in April. Emma's voice, tight with crying, saying, "I am so sorry for what we said to you." That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything I had been waiting for without knowing exactly what shape it was going to take when it finally came through the door. The back porch that evening was warm in the specific April way of Austin. The temperature sitting at that particular point where you can stay outside after dark without a jacket, and the air smells like the jasmine I had planted along the back fence 2 summers ago when I had decided that planting something that bloomed every April was an accurate thing to do with an afternoon in a yard that was still becoming what I wanted it to be. Emma and Connor stayed for dinner. Emma helped me cook the way she had helped me cook when she was small, before the distance, standing beside me at the counter and asking questions and handing me things I needed before I asked for them. Connor set the table without being asked. We ate on the back porch in the April warmth with the jasmine doing its annual thing and talked about nothing particularly important. The way people talk when the important thing has already been said, and what remains is just the ordinary pleasure of being in the same space without anything between them. The file was in a courthouse on the other side of Austin. Sandra Walsh had built it over 2 years with the methodical patience of someone who understood that documentation outlasts everything else. The anger outlasts itself. The distance outlasts itself. Even the story Trevor had told, patient and consistent and in age-appropriate installments over 7 years, had not outlasted the file. Some things wait to be found. They wait in public records rooms and manila folders and courthouse filing systems, patient and complete and exactly as true on the day they are read as they were on the day they were written. My children had found it. We had the rest.